Hello, this is Graham from Gramophones. I thought I would deal in this video with one of the most daunting processes that face you as a gramophone restorer, and that is the removing of the spring from the spring case that's contained in the motor. You come to it for the first time and you read lots of horrendous stories on YouTube, so much so that's why I'm working outside. I got in the habit of working outside simply because I thought if anything goes wrong I can leap out of the way and there's going to be plenty of room for me to leap into. Not that that helps, because this thing can uncoil faster than I can jump. Nevertheless, it's a nice day, so we're outside. First of all, the equipment I'm going to use, you'll see I'm set up on a workmate that's equipped with 4 plastic jaws. This is so I can hold the case of the spring in one place securely while I work on it. What you don't want to be doing is having that moving around loose and trying to control the spring at the same time, because control of the spring is the crux of doing it correctly. So I've got the workmate. The gloves I use for removing the spring, well, these are often shown in books and on YouTube as being those heavy builders, gardeners kind of fabric gloves. I don't find those too useful. They soon fill up with grease, and once they're filled with grease you can't do anything with them. I much prefer these rubberized gloves, which you can clean off, and also if during the process they do get greasy, you can wipe most of the grease off and still have a good grip. In addition to the gloves, I've got a small pointy tool that we need to use, particularly on the HMV type of cases where there is a circlip that holds the lid of the case in place. You need something for levering that out, as you will see in a moment. For the actual spring removal, we need to remove a few coils first of all from the centre, and here I'm just going to use a piece of sharpened wooden dowel. It's important to use something that's softer than the spring. You don't want to scratch the spring or damage it, because you simply create a weak spot. Hopefully we will not need these. It's a couple of mole grips and a light hammer. Those we use when we're putting the spring clip back on top of the lid case. You'll see that just now, but that stage is not as dangerous as the removal of the spring, but it is one of the most frustrating jobs known to man if you don't do it correctly, and hopefully I can show you how to do that, well, correctly in that it works for me. The last thing I want to show you is the grease itself. This is a lithium based multi-purpose grease that I use. I'm not going to use it in this demonstration. I'm just going to show you how to take the spring out and put the spring back. But what we would normally do is put 2 or 3 teaspoonfuls of this in the bottom of the spring case when it's empty. When we've got the spring back, another 2 or 3 on top, and then put the lid on. So, but that's the grease to use. Okay, so the first stage, we've got to get the spring out. I'm going to put that into the workmate. Take care how much I tighten that up, because we don't want to distort the case, but we do want it to be held firm. That's about right. The next stage is to remove the clip that's round the inside top edge of the case. And if you go round that clip, there will be a point where the 2 ends of the clip meet, and that then needs just levering out from the channel. And a bit fiddly to get at. There we go, and that pops out. There it is. Quite inconspicuous, but nevertheless a cause of many a headache is that. After that, the top of the spring case will come out quite easily, revealing inside the spring. At this point we need the gloves. And taking the wooden dowel, just locate the first few coils, and this is where we get into the dangerous section of this. The idea is to lift the coils and get your hand in between the coils that are out of the case and the ones that remain. Once that's done, then it's simply a case, he says, of working around the coils, keeping the coils that are in the case in their place until you have a controlled release of them. So this is coming out quite nicely. Finally, the last part is to remove the end of the spring from the case. You'll find it's held with a keyhole slot that goes over a little spigot on the inside of the spring case. Once that's out, all that remains is to clean out the old grease from the spring case and clean off the old grease from the spring. I say all that remains, that itself is quite a job. A lot of people will soak the spring in the case in paraffin or kerosene overnight and then clean off the next day. I use WD-40 for the same purposes because I can't wait till the next day. I usually like to get the spring back in the case the same day. But both of those items must be cleaned off. So too must the lid. The lid will have old grease on the underside. But there we have it. We've got the spring out of the case. Now what we've got to do is get it back. Here is a photograph showing a close-up of the spring. Notice that there is a section at the end of the spring there that's taken on a bluey colour. This is because that section has been annealed, that is to say it's been heated until it's red hot in order to soften the metal so that the keyhole can be cut. This is a common area for brakes and springs, and if one occurs near the keyhole you can see there's obviously enough annealed metal there to cut a new hole. If however there isn't, it would mean that the section would need to be annealed first before the keyhole could be cut. Here we've got a close-up showing the inside of the spring case, and notice two things. First of all how clean it is in there. All the old grease needs to be got out, and also notice the spigot at the top right where the keyhole in the spring will eventually clip, as we can see in this photograph. In order for this to be achieved, almost one whole coil of that spring needs to be into the spring case to allow that keyhole to align with the spigot. Okay, so now we're ready to put everything back together again. So remember, what we would normally do is put 2 or 3 teaspoonfuls of multi-purpose grease in the bottom of the spring case to start with, and then we're ready to put the spring back. Now the first stage is to get the keyhole to lock onto the little spigot that we saw in the photograph is on the inside of the spring case. Now to do that we need almost a full coil into the box first of all. This part here must be quite well down into the case so that when we move that back on itself, eventually it will lock on to the spigot as it's just done there. Now we need to bring the coils round and make sure that we go in front of the keyhole part of that spring so that that's pressing that outer coil well into the sides of the case. And then it's making sure we keep control over the spring as we get it fully back into the case. You'll find that when we get to the central part they will just drop in. Now at this stage it's very important that those coils are firmly down into case, I'm just going to use the end of this tool that I used before just to get those coils flat. It's important that they are flat. Without them being flat, the top of the case will not, the lid of the case will not sit as flat on there as it should. And if it's not doing that, it won't reveal a clean channel around the top lip of that case, and that's vital for the next stage. Okay, so with the spring now securely in its case and the coils nice and flat, we're going to put 2 or 3 teaspoonfuls of grease into there, and then when the lid's on and when the spring case is back in the motor working, the winding action and the unwinding during playing of the spring will spread that grease throughout the whole of the length of the spring. But now we've got what is often a tricky bit, and could well be this afternoon, in which we're going to put back the lid of the case. Now I've taken my gloves off in readiness for this, because this you really do need to be quite dexterous. This can turn into a nightmare. If you do it with some form of system, it isn't too bad, but people can spend 2, 3 times as long on this stage as they did on taking the spring out of the case and putting it back again. The important thing is that the spring is flat, that the lid of the case sits nice and flat onto the spring, and therefore there is clearly visible the channel all the way around the edge. Now if you're very lucky, when you take the spring with the 2 ends facing outwards, put them on the opposite side to where you're standing, and if you're very lucky, that bringing those 2 ends together, you will eventually end up with the side nearest to you just slightly overlapping, and with many a spring it is, in that case, easy, or relatively easy, to press that last bit of spring back into its channel. In this instance, it's not going to behave, it's not going to be like that. So what we're going to do is, I found it useful to engage the help of a couple of mole grips, and I'm going to grip one on that side and one on that side, and that's left me with just the last part of the spring sticking out, and that I'm going to try and tap in like that. And now that spring is nicely seated in its channel. And that's it. That's one spring case ready now to go back in the motor and carry on working for another 80 years, hopefully. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it's proved useful to you, and maybe we'll see you again sometime. Bye bye now.